As a result of the labor shortage, since America is producing all kinds of stuff, we need as many people, all hands on deck, to be able to produce stuff for the war effort. There's a lot of women entering the workforce, but there's still a labor shortage. So, one way you can get there is to attract immigrants to be able to work in various different factories. Huh. Well, there is a country immediately to America's south that may be able to help with that. The United States partners with Mexico to temporarily allow Mexican workers to work in U.S. factories in various different cities and agricultural fields across the United States to help with the effort. Specifically, I'm talking about the Bracero program, where Mexican migrants would be granted a permit to work in the United States for a certain period of time. And they would work factory jobs and have various different things, and many of which in their social or leisure time, especially in places like Los Angeles or whatnot in Southern California, would develop kind of a, I don't want to say a gang culture, but kind of a social culture that was not exactly law abiding, put it that way. So, having grown up in South Texas and being Hispanic myself, I'm aware of the term pachuco or cholo or anything else of the sort. That's a pretty common use of vernacular down in South Texas, in El Valle, as we call it. Otherwise, though, those terms were actually born more from the World War II era, oftentimes relating to Mexican workers who would wear various different leisure suits that had ties at the bottom of their feet, um, that may kind of look like a suit without a tie or anything else of the sort. Those were called zoot suits. And in the mid 1940s, it was common for Mexican workers in their leisure time to wear zoot suits as they were deemed as being inappropriate by white society. Well, you tell somebody you can't do something, oftentimes human nature wants to keep doing it because you reject that you reject the rules, if you will. So oftentimes Mexican laborers would riot in the streets, basically rioting the idea and protesting the idea that they can't wear zoot suits. And sometimes these would get violent. And in Southern California, eventually, by the end of World War II, zoot suits were deemed as being illegal to wear. So if you were caught wearing a zoot suit, you were going to be arrested. Okay? Otherwise, though, other things were going on with other different minorities in the United States at that time. Let's talk about Japanese Americans for a second. Obviously, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor. Okay. FDR formulated a system of rounding up Japanese Americans or otherwise people of Japanese descent so as to intern them in camp. It was believed that people of Japanese descent would not be loyal to the United States cause, and they would either act subversively to sabotage the American effort or otherwise remain unhelpful. So people of Japanese descent, largely on the West Coast, were rounded up. And there were two different types. The Issei, which were non American citizens, people of Japanese descent living in the United States. And then there was the Nisei, people who are naturalized, they became United States citizens, or there were people of Japanese descent born in the United States. It was almost believed that there was hardly a difference. So where Issei and Nisei were rounded up to these relocation centers, basically so as to prevent them from being able to coordinate and communicate with Japan back home to where they might be able to sabotage the American war effort. That was the belief at the time. Franklin Roosevelt did this. Our American government rounded people up because they believed that they would sabotage. They didn't have hardcore evidence. They weren't doing it to people of German American descent. They were doing it to Japanese. Our government did this. Franklin Roosevelt strongly believed in this. Many of these people of Japanese descent spent upwards of 3 years in these internment camps. And these camps oftentimes lacked proper medical attention, oftentimes lacking proper nutrition. Any lucrative employment that these Japanese Americans previously had, that was gone by the wayside. That didn't exist. There weren't really any schools for Japanese youth, and it was very socially isolating and debilitating. Kind of sounds familiar today based upon social distancing and quarantining for coronavirus situations, but that's specifically voluntary and there's an illness. These people in Japan, or these Japanese Americans, were virtually imprisoned just because they were of Japanese descent. Many of these people had no harm or ill will towards the United States, and a number of Japanese Americans would actually volunteer to serve in the U.S. military, seeing action in Europe. But otherwise, though, they were basically imprisoned in an encampment because they were Japanese descent.